For today's webinar, we have Selenium versus Playwright. Let the code speak. In the left corner, representing Selenium and specializing in test automation strategies and techniques, a pillar of the global test automation community, a world-renowned speaker and thought leader often found presenting and teaching at international software conferences, the driving force and director of Test Automation University, and Java champion, Angie Jones. And in the right corner, representing Playwright, striving to help others in solving problems in software development, testing, and quality. Over the past decade, he's designed and built robust test automation projects from the ground up that can run thousands of tests continuously. The lead developer for the Boa Constrictor, the .NET Screenplay Pattern, the Automation Panda, and Applitools developer advocate, Andrew Knight. Fans, are you ready? For all of those watching around the world on our new platform, let's get ready to code.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Patrice. Hello, Andy.
Yo, 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 what's going on?
All right, you ready to do this?
Oh, I am very ready. I'm excited. I want to see this go down.
Nice, nice. Okay, very nice. So yeah, we're gonna do a battle of the code where, you know, we're going to pit Selenium against Cypress and see which one is a better tool. And we're gonna do that with some code samples, right? So when we announced that we were doing this battle, you all had some pretty strong opinions, right? So Andre said existing Selenium projects will continue for a long time. I agree with that. But after learning Playwright, I will never start a new end-to-end test project in Selenium. Ouch. I thought that was pretty strong. But it seems he really, really liked Playwright even after using Selenium. Rahul says, I've used both tools for some time now, and I can't wait to see what points both speakers put. Thank you, Rahul. A little bit more neutral here. We have Dushyant that says, I've used both Selenium and Playwright. For me, Playwright is the clear winner. Let the code speak. And then Akash says, about time that Selenium got a worthy competitor. I've been a WebDriver fan for 7+ years. I can't wait to see how long Playwright will survive against it. Wow. And then Ixchel says, sorry, Angie, on this one, I'm Team Andy. My bet is on Playwright. And then Sean says, Playwright is absolutely changing the game. Automatic waits, built-in device and multiple browser support, available in Python, JS, and more. My goodness. Okay, so why did we choose to do this comparison? Well, Selenium has been the king forever. I love Selenium. That is not a secret to anyone. It's the most widely used automation framework. It supports multiple languages, and that has what helped it be the king, right? There have been formidable alternatives that have come onto the scene, such as Cypress. However, Cypress is JavaScript only. So while it's definitely doing very well in the JavaScript ecosystem, that's not all that we use in test automation. And so Selenium has been able to just reach a broader audience because they support the Java, the JavaScript, the Python, the .NET, you know, the Ruby, and all of these various bindings. And so it just had a larger reach until Playwright came along. So Playwright is, as far as I know, the only other test automation tool that has this breadth of support for various programming languages. So this is pretty exciting. Playwright is also an open source tool. It's created by Microsoft. So really, really interesting, right? We could technically do a feature by feature type of comparison. But as practitioners, Andy and I, we love to code, right? We want to see the code. I want to see on my day-to-day job, how does this one stand up against that one, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to compare some common automation tasks in both of these frameworks to see how the code looks. And we're going to use Java for both of these because why not, right? Java is the most popular programming language in test automation. We want to do apple-to-apple comparison. It's also the probably most verbose programming language used. So, this will really give us some insight on how these two stand up against each other. I'm going to represent Selenium, of course, and then Andy is going to represent Playwright. All right. So the battle is going to go like this. We'll have 10 rounds, 10 different scenarios that we're going to automate against. We're going to show the implementations for these scenarios in both Selenium and then also in Playwright. And then you, the audience, is going to vote, right? We have no control over who is the winner here today. Based on the comments, it seems you all have already made your mind up, but hey, maybe I can change that, okay? So you will vote after each round. We'll show the implementation side by side. You as the practitioner, I want you to pick which one of these do you like better, right? And we'll do a little discussion, okay? All right, we're ready? Eddie, Andy, you ready?
Oh, yes. I was born ready.
Let's go. Okay, so round one is elements interaction. Let me show you the scenario. So this is the applications, basically the hello world of test automation, right? A login. So in this scenario, we're going to enter a username, a password. We're going to click that sign in button. Okay. So Andy, you take it away with the Playwright implementation.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks, Angie. So here we have on the screen a very basic snippet for what a test case could look like written in Java with Playwright for performing the login and then making sure that the home page or the page after the login page is displayed. So going line by line here. Just presume a basic JUnit format. Presume that all the stuff has already been set up. And so in Playwright, all the interaction happens on what is called a page. The capital P page class, shown here with the instance variable lowercase p page. So the first thing we need to do is we need to navigate to that login page. And so that's on line 4 here. You see the simple command, page.navigate, and you pop in the URL. Nothing too fancy here. The following 3 lines are all part of the element interactions performing the login. So here, what we want to do is we want to enter in our username into an input field, enter in the password, and then click the login button. Playwright commands are really concise and really nice here. We can see page.fill. What the fill method does for Playwright's page class is it will send certain keystrokes, certain text, to that input element. So here, page.fill has 2 arguments. The first one is a selector for the target element. In this case, the target element is the input field, and we can select it by the ID username. Playwright selectors are just string literals. You pop them in here. Playwright supports all the big kinds, CSS selectors, XPath. If you want to do an ID selector like you see here, you would say ID equals, and then the ID. We could have used a CSS selector, hashtag, username. I thought it was a little more obvious to say ID equals, also to show off a little bit about what Playwright's locators are all about. So ID equals username is the selector. And then the second argument is the text or the keystrokes that we want to send to that input element. So here, a username like Andy. Line 6 is the same thing, just instead of for username, it's for password. So again, page.fill, selector ID equals password. The keys to send some password, panda love or something. The next line down is for actually clicking that login button once you've entered in all the good stuff. page.click. That's all it takes. And again, the click takes in a selector. So in this case, we're doing an ID selector again, named log-in. And it doesn't need anything else because all you're doing is going click. Nice. What's really nice about these page fill and page click methods, first of all, it's one method, right? You have the element location and interaction together in one, which is really nice. And the second thing that's really nice about these is that they perform automatic weighting. So we don't have to set like an explicit weight or anything. Page.fill and page.click, they will have by default a 30-second timeout waiting for the target element to become actionable before Playwright will actually send the interaction. So that avoids a lot of those misfires and flakiness that you see in web UI tests. The final line here, assert that page locator for a selector has some text. What this is doing is a bit special. Assert that is not a JUnit assertion. This is a Playwright assertion. It comes from the Playwright locator assertions class. And what it's saying is that, okay, when you have a Playwright assertion, it'll continue to check the assertion for a certain amount of time until it becomes true before timing out. So again, there's that automatic waiting in there that's nice. And so what are we asserting here? Asserting that a certain element on the page or a certain locator on a page, locator points to an element, named element header, has the CSS class element header, that is the first one, that's that arrow, nth equals 0, the first one, 0 index, the first element header class element, asserting that will eventually appear and have the text financial overview, which would be like the name of the element on that page. So what that's doing is after you perform the login, you're waiting for the actual page to load, and you're verifying that this certain element header that you're looking for on the page has this text financial overview. So that's in a nutshell what element interaction looks like in Playwright. Angie, over to you for Selenium.
All right, Angie. I have a question, Mr. Web Element Locator Guru, who has the course on TAU. Andy, you've taught us we shouldn't be using indexes and stuff on our locator. So what's up with line 8 there? Why do you have to do that n equals 0? I don't like it. I don't like it.
I knew you're going to dig me on that. Yep. So I'm going to be straight with y'all. I'm not a huge fan of this either, but I'm actually kind of conflicted. So for a fuller explanation of this, that nth equals 0 thing is in Playwright what we call an nth element selector. Playwright is really nice in that it lets you append this arrow, and then index thing to say, I want to specifically drill into the nth element on a page. The reason why I'm doing this here, even though it's like, well, why would you even need that? It just so happens on that login page that there are actually 2 elements that are identified by the .element-header CSS selector. Now in Selenium, what it will do is it will grab, if you get multiple elements for a locator, it'll just grab the first one, right? Or you can grab a list, but if you're trying to get one, it'll just grab the first one. Playwright by default has something called strict mode, where if you have any selectors that will return more than one element, Playwright will throw an exception and say, this is not unique. You need to make it unique. And so when I was coding this up, I got bit by that. I was like, oh crap. So the way that I thought was easiest to try to get around that whole strict mode exception was to say, okay, well, what I'm really looking for on this page is I'm actually looking for the first element that has the element header class, right? And as long as that appears and has the text I'm looking for, then I feel satisfactory in the assertion I'm trying to make. So it's a bit of conflict, right? Because, on one hand, you have this ugly, index that you have to stuff in there. Of course, I could have tried to use another selector, but I kind of wanted to show this. So on one hand, you have that extra little, you have to nail down the index. But on the other hand, it is kind of nice because it forces you to be a little more explicit, right? It forces you to really think about, exact elements on the page and not just have a whole list of them come and just pick off the first one. because I've also been in the
Okay.
position where I've thought that I was getting a unique element, and it so happened it was identifying multiples on the page. And so here it's like, oh, I'm forced to be explicit. I'm forced to think about it. So it has a pro and a con. Like I said, I feel conflicted about it, but
Yeah,
this is what it
yeah.
is.
Look, especially if we add more elements with our class or whatever, then we got to update this. But let me ask you this question, Andy. So here you essentially using a class locator, and then you're saying, all right, it's going to be multiple. Give me, the very first one here. And then in the interaction ones, you're using IDs. So good thing you got IDs there. Does this also support like XPath or things like that?
Yes. So Playwright supports a lot of different kinds of locator types. They kind of encourage you to use CSS selectors. That's kind of like the default one or the simplest one. But you can do XPath. You can just pop in the XPath in there, I believe. You can do like
so when
like you've seen here.
ID equal username, could you have also done just hashtag username? That would have worked.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
All right. All right. Let's move on. We got a lot of rounds to go. Okay. So let's see. For Selenium to do the login, we're going to say driver.get. That's going to launch the application or get us to this URL. And then for the interactions, we're going to use that driver. We're going to say find the element. And then we express how do we want to find that. So it's a separate class that says by, right? I can do by ID. I can do by CSS selector, by XPath, whatever I want to do. I really like that because that allows me to be like very explicit and expressive, and I don't have to remember all of these symbols. What's a hashtag? What's a dot mean? What's this and that, right? So it's very clear to anyone who's reading it. And then for filling in text fields, we'll use the sync keys method here. And for clicking, we just say .click. There is no assertion library that's bundled with Selenium, like with Playwright. So I'm just using good old-fashioned JUnit here. And I'll do, again, find my element, this time by class name, and then get the text. All right. So let's go ahead and pit these side by side. Patrice is going to give you a poll so that you can decide which one of these you like, right? Andy, what do you think? Take a moment, y'all, look at it. What do you think, Andy? How's the Selenium one compare, you think?
Man, so just by looking at the text on the page, I see fewer characters for what it's worth. There's less you got to type out. If I could talk a little smack here about the Selenium one, when you perform the interactions, there's that distinct separation of element location from the interaction, right? You have to say, driver find element, boom, that's one thing. And then that returns the element object. And then from there, you have to say, do something, whether that's send keys or click. When we've got them like tied together here, it's not that big a deal. But one thing I have noticed that's a bit frustrating, sometimes people may separate those. And the farther those are separated apart, the more likely there's a chance for a stale element exception. Whereas in the Playwright one, they are tied together, so that cannot happen. Just food for thought as y'all are voting.
Yeah. Now, that brings up an interesting observation, Andy, because you're right. It's kind of slick how Playwright is able to like basically page.fill. Here's the element. Here's the text I want to fill. That's really clean. I won't lie. My question then becomes, okay, what if I need that web element object for something? Does this page.locator give you a web element object? Like, what if I need it because I need to do some further actions? How would I do that in Playwright?
Yep. So in Playwright, you do have two ways to kind of, it's a little weird, to kind of get the quote-unquote elements. There's the page.locator method here, which returns a capital L locator object. And the locator is is an object that is a locator. It's an object that points to an element. And so the locator class is typically used for things like the assertions or the explicit weighting we'll see a little bit later, where you don't necessarily want that object, but you need a more concrete thing to hold on to frame it, you know, to try to reference it. So that's what the locator is. You can also get element handle objects in Playwright, which would be most analogous to, in Selenium WebDriver, the capital W web element object, which is actually like the fetched thing that you can do stuff with. Now, you typically want to avoid, the order of preference is, first of all, try to stick with the things on the page, like the page fill and page click, like we said before, because it is more concise. It does guarantee perfect freshness, you know, that kind of thing. A second preference would be the locator one, because it's the locator reference versus the element itself. And then the last thing that you want to, if you have to do it, but you want to try to avoid, is the actual element itself, because of those staleness issues. But you can get it if you need it.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Andy. All right. I'm going to try to address a few of the questions you all have, and then we're going to move on. So, don't you need to get text of the element in Playwright?
Great question.
You have the has text, right?
Yeah. So, yes, in the assertion there, you see the chaining together. The assert that with the locator inside, then dot has text. That has text is what's doing the checking. So internally, what Playwright will do is it will see, is that target element from the locator ready yet? Is it actionable? And if it is, get the text from it and then see, okay, is that element's text the same as financial overview here? And so we don't need to like get the text explicitly and then compare it. The Playwright locator, or sorry, the Playwright assertion chain there will handle that for us.
Okay. All right. Cool. Okay. I think the other ones we pretty much answered. People were asking about do they need to specify if they're going to use ID, class, XPath, etc. You talked about that already. Does the fill method in Playwright has default support for clearing the text box content, Andy? What if there's something already in there?
That is a great question.
That is.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I could look up in the docs a little bit later and find out.
Okay. They might. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. And then what is the default timeout on those interactions, Andy? Do you know that?
I believe it is 30 seconds, and I know for a fact you can override it.
All right. Okay, cool. And then someone asked, how do we implement page object model? I actually have a blog post on that on the Amplitude site. We'll try to get you that link. Patrice, are you able to put links in the comment section for folks if I get you that?
Can. I'll post
all
that.
Right. So, all right. I'll find that and then I'll send that to you all. So I have that already. Okay. All right. Let's go on to round two. Round two is drop downs, right? And drop downs, this is different than regular elements because they're a bit more complex. They contain these option sub elements. So it's interesting, how do you interact with these, right? So here's an example of a drop down from our kitchen play site here. And this is how I would do it in Selenium. So Selenium, if we look at line 6 here, Selenium actually has a special class that's dedicated specifically to drop down elements. And this is called the select. It's a new package I have to install and everything like that, a different dependency. So this select, I would basically find it by its locator, instantiated this new drop down. And then from there, I can work with that select object. So I can say select by value or select by index or by the visible text or whatever. Okay. All right. What about you, Andy, and Playwright?
Sure. Let's flip it over and check it out. So similar kind of thing, right? The interaction of, clicking a drop down, selecting an element, and then getting something from it is the same. But with Playwright, the API is a little bit more condensed than in Selenium. So we start off line 4, again, page.navigate, same thing we saw as before. And if we want to select an option from a dropdown. We don't need to create a separate class for it. Again, we have a convenience method in that page class that will do that for us, called select option. So here in the select option, page.select option, there's 2 arguments. First one, again, is a selector. And the more interactions you see with Playwright, the more this kind of format you'll see with the page methods. It's selector and then extra stuff. So the selector we have, again, is an ID selector. So I said ID equals, splices select single. I could have done hashtag splices select single, but again, using Playwright's ID thing. And then the second option is the string for the value to choose. In this case is ginger. There are other ways you can select. You don't have to select by value. You can select by text or by option or whatever. I believe the select option method has some additional options you could add as arguments to kind of specify which one you wanted to get. But in this case, since we're doing the plain basic one, we can just use a string literal and say ginger. So that will choose the option in the dropdown. Then at lines 7 and 8, that's the assertion to where it's getting the chosen value from the dropdown and verifying it's what you expect. And so this will be very, very similar to the Playwright assertion we saw in round 1. Assert that. Then what are we asserting? We're asserting on a page locator for that select, same selector here. We're asserting that that select element has the value of quote unquote ginger. Now the has value method here, that is like saying an input value or the input attribute on the element. Again, like with the previous assertion, there's auto waiting here to make sure that not only is the element actionable before checking it, but there's that timeout to continue checking this assertion until it becomes true or the timeout's hit. So that's how we can choose to select something as well as to verify a select has something.
Okay. Very, very nice. I won't lie. It's pretty clean. I neglected to acknowledge the first round winner was Playwright with a whopping 70% of the vote. So that was pretty harsh, I thought, of you all, but whatever. Okay, so here is round 2, Selenium versus Playwright for interacting with drop downs. How's this looking? Andy, I gotta admit, like having it just kind of nicely in there without the additional dependency and the different class. I mean, it just made it very smooth, just like if I were doing field or if I were doing a click or whatever. That's pretty nice. Now this select option, did you do can you select by index and can you select by like visible text, or is this just value? Like, tell me how that works.
Sure. So I believe by the default it's doing it by value. And I believe that you can add on extra arguments to this select option method if you wanted to do it by things like text or something else. I'd have to double check the docs again, but I know that it is possible.
All right. Okay. Yeah, that was Jim's question too. Hey, Jim, can Playwright select by the index like you just want the third item? Oh my God, y'all are like beating me up pretty bad. Okay. All right, let's see. Any other questions? Can you bring in Selenium class to use Selenium methods if you need to want? Oh, that's interesting. So can you like mix and match Selenium and Playwright, Andy? Is the question basically. Probably. You could probably do anything you want, right? But I don't know if that's a great idea. If you do it, write us a blog post. We want to see what you did there, right? If an element doesn't have select tag, then how can we handle it in Selenium? If it doesn't have a select tag, then it's not necessarily a drop down, right? I think I've worked on projects that had some other way of doing drop down, something weird. Essentially, we just got it as a regular web element object and kind of manipulated, like click it to make the thing pop up and then click the option thing It was pretty gross, actually. But you know, us automation engineers are magicians, right? We do what we got to do.
Amen.
Okay. How do you select all options in Playwright, Andy? Do you know that?
Ooh, oh.
Oh, y'all putting Andy to the test, okay?
Man, I'm going to be honest. I don't know off the top of my head.
There probably is. If I'm looking at this, it says select option. There must be like a select all or something like that.
Yeah. Huh? It's either there's a similar method or like there's an option you say like multi and you just kind of put it in the list. I vaguely remember seeing it.
They're quizzing you. They're like, how can you read all the values from the drop down and all of that? So I'm sure, like, I will say this. Playwright has some really good documentation. So I'm sure they have like all of these APIs just kind of listed for dealing with the drop down. All right.
Yes,
this is fun. Okay, so Andy kicked my butt yet again. Let's go to round 3 and see if I can make up some ground here. All right, so this time we're doing uploading files. Patricia, if you could take the poll down. All right, cool. So uploading the files, we're going to do a good old-fashioned file picker, our favorite thing in automation, right? These are kind of tricky to deal with because this button is like, it basically brings up a JavaScript pop-up, and that's not in the DOM, right? So we've always in our life had to kind of hack around file pickers. So let's see how we do this in Playwright. Andy.
Yep. In Playwright, it's basically one line, one beautiful line. So in our code, again, we have a navigation to that page, and the one line that will do the file upload for us is page.setInputFiles. And again, this takes two arguments. The first one being the selector for that input element. On the page, I believe it's the input tag with the file type. And so for Playwright to work, it needs to be lined up like that. So here, I'm using an ID selector yet again. And then the second argument is the path to the file that you wish to upload. So here I'm using Java's paths library. I'm just saying paths.get, and that will form the full file path for me. With this, I just pick.jpg. Let's just assume it's in the working directory. We could have it in any other directory, like if you're working in a Maven project and it's in a resources directory, you could go, down through that chain or whatnot. But essentially, this will do it. It will grab your path, send it to there, and do the upload for you.
All right, pretty nice. Let's see what we're doing in Selenium. So for Selenium, I got me a one-liner too, Angie. So I'm finding the element by the photo ID. So by the ID. So that whole little field there for the file upload, and then I just send my keys there. I just type in the path to my image, and that'll get the job done. So there you have it, Selenium versus Playwright. Both of these are a one-liner here.
So Angie, I got a question for you.
All right.
So your file path, does that have to be an absolute path?
It does need to be an absolute path here. But I see you have to use the paths object. So you have to import a whole nother class in yours. So yeah,
it's not a string literal.
You know what I mean? So,
Pros and cons to both, eh?
Pros and cons to both. What do y'all think?
I guess another interesting thing, I don't know if it's like a good or bad, just kind of observation. With Selenium, when you're doing this, it's literally just like you're doing an input to any element, right? Like if you didn't know that this was a file picker, it could just be like you're popping in a text value into a regular old input field, right? Whereas with Playwright, it's like it specifically has to be like setting input files, right? I tried it with just kind of like a regular input thing. Playwright was not having it. It was not having it. So I was like, oh crap. So I tried that first, and then I had to go into the docs to learn, like, oh wait, so if that's not how I upload a file, how do I do it? Oh, I need this special method. Okay. So interesting little tidbit there.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good observation, Andy. That's a very good point. It looks like Playwright has walked away with this one again, but not so badly this time.
Yeah,
so
this was cutting it close. Like,
yeah, 58 to 42. Okay. All right,
hey, Angie and Andy. So we're
Uh-huh.
having a lot of questions for people asking for a draw option. Do we want to give them a draw option for the other rounds?
No, you got to pick one. You don't get to say draw at work. Your boss says, "Hey, I want us to use Selenium or I want us to use a Playwright," and you got to pick one. So you guys go ahead with your gut. All right. If you don't know, do a any, mini, miny, mo. Let me pick Selenium. Yay! All right. Let's rock and roll. Okay, so the next round is frames. Ooh, iframes, the bane of our existence, right? Okay, so these are super tricky. Here is a website that basically has like a same site frame, cross domain frame. I will say this, I know Selenium and Playwright are able to handle these. Cypress doesn't stand up so well especially when talking about like cross domain types of frames and stuff, right? Let's see how Playwright does. First, I'm gonna start with Selenium. So I basically on line 7 saying switch to, that's the command. So from the Selenium WebDriver, I can switch to a frame. I give it the frame name or ID. And then once I've done the switch to frame, I'm inside of that frame context and I can interact with any elements inside of that frame. Now, if I wanted to get out of that frame and back to the main context or go to another frame, I would need to switch out of the frame's context and then continue doing whatever I wanted to do. So there's my Selenium code. Andy, what do you got for Playwright? And tell us about the context and stuff.
Sure. So with Playwright, it's actually pretty similar to Selenium's code. Again, we navigate to the page. And here, what is going on is that, okay, we're going to say is framed as an assertion, but ultimately to get the iframe and the locator or the element on the iframe, what we do is we start with our page again, and we say page.frameLocator. This works kind of like the locator method in that it's a pointer to the iframe on the page. And so we're going to pop in the ID of that iframe to kind of identify it. Then once we have the locator for the frame, we can then start to get elements inside that frame. And so we chain that on as well with a locator method, just like we would on a regular page, right? So we went from page to frame locator now to a regular locator. We're looking for that fruits and vegetables element on the page. And then because what we're trying to do with this particular snippet is to say, okay, I want to make sure that this is actually visible on the page, we're going to wrap that in an assertion. And so the assert that whatever goes on side is visible, that should be familiar to us because we've seen things like assert that it has text, assert that it has, I forget what the last one was, but assert that is visible is going to repeatedly check to see until that whatever's inside actually becomes visible on the page. And so what's inside is, that context of, okay, I want to get the iframe, and then in the iframe, I want to get a particular element by this locator. And that's all it takes.
Okay.
It works for same domain as well as cross domain.
All right. Okay. So you said, help me again. So once you get inside of there, you find the locator inside of there, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. On the next line, if I wanted to do something at the main level outside of this frame, what do I do? Do I need to switch back out or in or anything like that?
So if you wanted to do something outside of that frame, like
Yeah.
let's say at line 10, right? We wanted to do more
Yeah.
stuff on the regular page. It should just be page.fill, page.click, because the frame locator is what set the context for that chain of calls. You're outside of that, doesn't matter now.
Okay. All right. Okay. Very nice. Okay. I'm looking through the questions here. Patrice, let's go ahead and put the poll up. So here you have it. This looks about the same to me, y'all. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
This looks about the same. We got the same amount of code. Y'all give me a bone here. Let's see.
So Angie, I have a
Yeah.
I was going to say,
Go
I have a
ahead,
quick
Angie.
question here. Because I can't quite remember. It's been a while since I've done this in Selenium. When you say driver.switch to frame, let's say at line 10 I wanted to do something outside of that frame. Would I have to switch back, or do I just go back with like driver.find element?
No, you got to switch back. If I
Okay.
got to get out of this frame, so like on line 10, I want to look at the header of the page or something that's not inside this frame as main context, then my line 10 will say driver.switch to, and then I can get back to the main part and then continue on with the test. Okay, what about, so Arson is asking, y'all are just being mean at this point. So
I'm
Arson
surprised
is
by
asking,
this one.
what about if there's a frame inside a frame, Andy? Like or I have another question. Arson, you don't mind if I add on to it? Y'all clear these votes, Patrice. They need to vote again. I have a good question. So what if we had an element with the same ID, but it's in different frames? How is your beloved Playwright going to handle that one? Oh, Patrice, I was only kidding. But Andy, how would y'all handle that?
That's a great question. Honestly,
Would you have to use your little imp thing?
So I would want to test that out on my own before I would speak to something. My guess is, because you're saying frame, or because you're saying page.frame locator, once you do that frame locator, my gut tells me that it frames everything else chained onto that within that context. So as long as there's one ID within that frame, I'm guessing it would just, it would just resolve to that one. And then if you want to get the second one, you would do a separate call, page frame locator, ID equals the other kitchen table. But again,
that makes sense. That makes logical sense. That's a really good educated guess there. I think that frame locator, that frame locator is the key right there. So you're basically saying, okay, look inside this frame and deal with stuff, but it's not needing to switch the context, right? So you're not like basically traveling inside of that and kind of getting stuck, but you can, you're just saying, look there right quick, do something, come on back out of here. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so Playwright has won again, 55% to about 45%. All right, so wow.
It's getting closer. It's getting closer.
Oh my God.
I'm feeling a little spicy here.
All right, round 5. All right, we get to good stuff now. Waiting. Everybody wants to know how waiting happens. Because that's the thing that causes us a lot of grief. Our scripts are moving super fast, and we gotta make sure that it's waiting on things that it's supposed to be waiting on. Okay, so this little page, this is my little demo app, and when I search for something, notice it takes a slight amount of time before that thing clears. If I don't explicitly put some sort of waiting until the filter happens here, that fails. And that has been across the board with Playwright, with Selenium, with Cypress. Any tool I've used is not able to handle this sort of thing because the result is a totally different object that I'm not necessarily engaging with, right? So I'm basically saying, wait until this thing is in some sort of state. All right, so Playwright, Andy, let us know how that goes.
Sure. So the code here is a little bit more complex than the previous snippets, but that's because waiting in itself is a more complex problem. And I'm sure everyone's felt the pain of race conditions and waiting and the flakiness of tests. So this is really a key point. That's like, we have to make sure that our automation does this right. So here, what we're doing is basically that scenario Angie just showed. Lines 4 and 5, what it's doing is loading up this Automation Bookstore app, and then it's entering something in the search bar. And so that's doing the filtering. And so from the moment of line 5 page fill, that's when the race condition starts, where you have the app starting to do something and take some time, whereas the automation in its own executable process is trying to still move forward. And that's why we need the automation to wait for what's on the page. So the waiting here initially happens in two parts. The first thing we want to do is we want to wait for the books that are being filtered out to disappear, right? So with the particular query we had, there were 8 books originally. We popped that in. 7 of those 8 should disappear and 1 should be left. So the call at line 7 is the explicit wait for the things to be hidden or to disappear. And so how that happens here is in that page, the different books are part of list items, LI elements, with this .ui screen hidden class name. And what we want to do is we want to wait for those to become hidden, right? And so I have page.locator, and I've got my selector. And again, this time I've used another nth element selector because I have that whole, I can't have it choose more than one element because of the strict mode. So I'm just saying, hey, first element, as long as 1 is showing that it's going to be hidden, we'll say filtering is done. So page locator with my selector, and then .wait for. .wait for on a locator method, that is what the explicit wait in Playwright is. So if you ever want to explicitly wait on something, it's page, locator with the selector, .wait for. Now, you could just end it there, and by default, it'll wait up to 30 seconds for the thing to become visible. But we have a special case here, so we need to add some options. And so that's why you see there's the open parenthesis, and then it says new locator wait for options. And so the locator wait for options is going to have a fluent construction builder chain that will add additional options to customize how waiting is going to happen here explicitly. So the first thing is we don't want it to wait for this thing to be visible. What we want is for these particular elements to become hidden, right? Because they're still going to be in the DOM. It's just we're not going to see them. They're going to go from visible to hidden. So we need to make sure we explicitly say, hey, wait for it to be hidden. The second thing is, for this case, let's say that we don't want to wait the full 30 seconds. Let's say it should happen in 5 seconds or we have a problem. So here I've said set timeout, which customizes that timeout. It overrides the default 30. And I put in 5,000. You might think, 5,000 seconds. No, 5,000 milliseconds. So that's what's going on there. So this is an explicit wait for the first element of this type to become hidden for up to 5 seconds. Okay. So that's waiting for, the disappearance of the things on the page. Now, this next thing we want to do is we don't want to just make sure things disappeared. We want to make sure that the books that we do want do appear. And in our case, we expect only 1 to be there. So here's where this assertion comes in. Assert that page locator, put in my selector. Now the selector is going to look very similar to the other one, except I want it to be not hidden. And I'm going to assert that it has a count of 1, right? Because there should only be 1 element on that page. In this case, the locator is not using it's not using that strict mode where it's pointing down to exactly 1 element, because the has count method is expecting a list instead of a single element. Therefore, I don't need to put that nth element selector thing in there. It's kind of weird. But anyway, so I'm saying, hey, all elements by the selector, make sure there has a count of 1. And again, with this has count, there's a comma with locator assertions has count options. Kind of like we saw the wait for options, there's also a has count options. And here I'm also just setting, hey, I want the timeout to be 5 seconds or 5,000 milliseconds. So 2 parts of waiting explicitly. 1, make sure the elements go away. Secondly, an assertion, making sure the elements we expect to appear.
All right, cool. For, wait, Patrice, I didn't do Selenium yet.
Oh, but there's one more thing with Playwright I should mention too, Angie. If we go to the next slide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's this little trick here.
And you're still not done, Andy? Y'all, this is too complicated. If it takes this much explanation.
Well, let me help it be less complicated here. So, the cool thing about Playwright, because the assertions do that automatic weighting, we actually don't need that first explicit weighting check, right? Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to make sure that it filters down to only one book. And so implicitly, if you're waiting for the filtering to go down to one book, it means the other 7 were filtered out. So we can just straight up remove that middle check. I included it there to show what an explicit weight without an assertion would look like. But in this case, the test is just as valid, right? Because as long as I'm asserting that the non-hidden elements go down to a count of 1. And like I said before, this assert that does that automatic weighting. So the first time if it checks it, if the page still displays, let's say 7 out of those 8 books, it'll say, okay, assertion hasn't been met yet. Let's try it again for up to 30 seconds, or in this case, for up to 5 seconds until it finally hits it. And eventually it will. So it was complicated, but it didn't have to be as complicated as we originally made it.
Okay.
So now I've said my piece. Let's see what Selenium's got.
Okay, you flexing. Okay. All right. So for Selenium, we are doing the weighting, right? So we said go ahead and send those keys to testing. And then line 7 through 10 is where we're going to do that weight, right? So we're going to use this WebDriver weight class. They have a special class that's for weighting. We tell it how long we want to wait up until. So it's not a hard wait 5 seconds. We're waiting up until 5 seconds, and they'll continue polling until it gets there. So if it finds it in 1 second, then good. It'll keep moving. It has these nice classes. Wait until what? These nice methods. So wait until what? On line 8, I can give it some sort of condition. I want to wait until the presence of the element is located. And there's several of these methods that give me a bunch of different options for what exactly am I waiting for. And I think that's really nice because it handles a lot of the stuff behind the scenes to, like, for example, if I want to wait until something is present or visible, maybe. Let's say visible. If I want to wait till something is visible, it's also going to wait behind the scenes for the presence of that and then also the visibility too. So these are nice convenience methods that are embedded within Selenium here. All right. Okay, so now we're ready to vote here. This is the Selenium versus Playwright on weighting. Looks like about the same amount of lines. I'm going to argue that mine is a little bit less typing in this instance, okay? And look at Andy got that inf thing in there again, child. Y'all, what y'all think? Let's get a vote going. Andy, while we're waiting on that vote to come in, there are a lot of questions that are asking about that frame thing. I think people are having buyer's remorse with their vote. They are asking about the frame. So you switched to the frame. You did an action that was all chained on one line. They said, what if you want to do like a bunch of things in that frame, right? Do you have to continuously say the frame, and keep putting the ID in for your 5 different lines of code?
So I believe what you can do, and again, I'd want to test this out because I haven't done it yet myself. Page.frameLocator, that method, just like page.locator or page.whatever, page.frameLocator, I believe, returns an object that represents the locator for that frame. So I'm pretty sure you could do something like var f equals page.frameLocator with it, and then do things like f.locator.do this or f.locator.do that. I'd be interested to give that a try and see what happens, because I believe that because it would be an object that's returned from that, and the object represents a locator, not the frame element itself. So that should be able to spare you from having to repeat the selector for the frame over and over again. But again, I'd love to give that a try just to make sure I'm not speaking wrong.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. You got some homework on your hands, Andy.
I got tons of homework. It's going to be awesome.
I am glad y'all came ready and studious and prepared. Don't just give Andy this easy win. All right. Okay. Looks like Selenium has gotten its first win with the weighting strategy. They like the Selenium with a 63, about 64% of the vote. Folks like that one. Yay, Selenium. All right. Okay, bye, Jim. Jim got to leave. Okay. Someone is asking, I was wondering the use of having auto weight inside of the assertion in Playwright. Good work there. That is pretty nice. For these cases where you don't have to do the explicit. So let's go ahead and give Playwright their props on, you know, just your everyday kind of dealing with elements. It's nice that it handles that for you. Does Playwright look at a specific DOM attribute to verify the wait for selector state dot hidden is true, Andy? Yeah, it looks like he's waiting on that locator right there, right? So you've given it that locator and then chained the wait for there. So that's what it's waiting for, right?
Yep.
All right. Okay. All right. How do we provide multiple locators in Playwright? Like in Selenium, we could specify a locator like hashtag BLA, comma, hashtag BLA2. I've never seen that. Is that a thing? We don't know, Brian. I never used two locators in one web element before in Selenium. I think you're teaching us something new there. How to compare Selenium 4 feature of relative locators in Playwright, Andy? Yeah, so maybe we should have put that as one of the rounds. Selenium 4
should have been round 11.
Yeah, it has some pretty nice things like the relative locators and stuff like that. That does not exist in Playwright as of yet. All right. And then let's see. Let's say we got two elements after filter, and in assert Playwright uses has count. One doesn't make sense. Okay, I don't understand what they're saying, but I'm gonna move on. Okay, let's just move on. All right. So y'all have some great questions. I can sit here like all day with the questions. This is a good discussion. So round 6, we're going to talk about alerts now. So alerts are, oh my God, we got some really tricky things here, right? So if we look at this is a JavaScript alert or notification, right? It's not a part of the DOM. You can't see this in the DOM to be able to click this button or to read this text or to enter a field if it was a prompt or anything like that. So how do we handle this in both Selenium and in Playwright? In Selenium, so I have essentially three methods here. One is how do you accept an alert, right? To do so, we would basically say switch to. So that whole switch to context allows us to switch in the DOM with frames, but also switch outside of the DOM with alerts. And once I switch to and call this alert, then I am given this alert object, which I can then do things like accept. I can also dismiss. And then if I wanted to enter text, I could go ahead and store this. So y'all know how y'all were beating Andy up about that frame and stuff. So I could basically create this object alert and then be able to do multiple things with the alert. So send in the keys and then clicking the OK button. Okay. How about in Playwright, Andy? What we doing?
Sure.
Oh,
so
this looks interesting. Let's see.
Yeah. So I think there's a difference in philosophy of how to handle alerts between Selenium and Playwright. In Selenium, alerts are handled imperatively. They're seen as like a different tab or page or even frame because you have the driver switch to. And the idea is first you switch to your focus to have that in Selenium, and then you start sending interactions. Playwright handles it in terms of policy. The way Playwright looks at it, it says, okay, well, alerts are going to pop up eventually. you need to declaratively state ahead of time how you want to handle alerts when they come up. And then when they do come up, Playwright will handle it in an event-driven way for you automatically. So here, it's essentially the same kind of stuff that's ultimately happening, just a little bit different how it's specified. So in our first one, for testing the accept of the alert, rather than saying something like switch to the alert and then click the accept, we need to predefine to say, hey, page, whenever you're on a dialogue or an alert, for that case, same thing, handle it with an accept. And that's that dialogue : accept thing. That's kind of like a default method for accepting alerts in Playwright. So that way, when on line 9, when I say page click for that alert button, because what happens on the page is you click that button and then that triggers a JavaScript event to make the alert come. So here, when we trigger something that triggers an alert, Playwright already knows how to handle the alerts because we set the policy for that in line 8, right? So what's nice about that is if you want to handle all alerts in one way, you set the policy once, and then it'll just do it. If you ever want to change the policy, you can do it dynamically. You could, if at line 10 I wanted to do something different for another alert, I could say page on dialogue, do something different for the next one as well. Another interesting thing about Playwright is that by default, it accepts all alerts. So technically for the test accept alert test at line 7, I don't even need to set line 8, right? If I just did the page.click without explicitly setting a policy, Playwright will automatically be like, okay, accept it. Sure, boom, done. The only time that you really need to explicitly tell Playwright to do something with an alert is if you want to do something different than accept it. So like for the next one, test dismiss alerts, right? In this case, I want to explicitly dismiss it. So my policy at line 14 is saying page on dialogue, use the default dismiss method for the dialogue class. And so that'll finally for answering the prompt. I think this is it's a bit more concise than what we see in Selenium. Here, what I'm saying is page on dialogue. I'm not taking a default action from the dialogue class, but instead I'm providing a Lambda expression saying a dialogue I want to accept, but I also want to accept it with this prompt or with this message to put in the prompt. So in that case, when you click it, it'll accept it. It'll put in, what does it say? Nachos. It'll type in nachos. I
like nachos, Andy.
I mean, who doesn't? So, so in this case, again, it's interesting because it's that declarative thing. You're saying, hey, ahead of time, I know when I receive an alert that has a prompt, give it this answer, accept it, and boom.
So it feels backwards almost, right? So you're basically saying when you get a dialogue, this is what I want you to do, and now I'm going to open a dialogue. Is that accurate?
Yes.
That tickles my brain a little bit because it feels reverse order. What happened if you did click and then you did page on dialogue? Would that fail or something? What happened?
I'll tell you exactly what happened because that's what I did at first.
That's what's intuitive. So I'm saying this is not intuitive, Andy, but go ahead. Correct. What did you do? What happened?
So at first what I did is I had these backwards. I had page click and then like for the first test, page click, page on dialogue, dialogue accept. And it did it. Why? Because by default, Playwright was set to accept it. I was like, okay, that passed. And then when I got down to the answer prompt and I was doing it, I was like, why isn't it sending nachos? Why are nachos not appearing? And that's when I realized like, because it's declarative, not imperative. It's policy, not instruction. It's event driven. I need to specify ahead of time. This is how we're going to handle alerts. And then once I did it, it worked. So
that's gonna
I got burned on it.
That's going to trip people up. Andy, so for like example, line 14 and 15, if you inverted those with the dismiss, since accept is the default, if you would have clicked that confirm button, it would have automatically accepted?
I think so. So.
Yeah. And then someone is asking a great question. How do you verify the message on it then? Like, how do I get the message from from the alert window?
So that if you want to get the message from the alert window, you would have to fetch it through that Lambda expression. So like
which line?
At line 20.
Line 20?
So you can see page on dialog, and then there's that Lambda, that anonymous function, as you could call. What you can do is in there, you can say something like dialog.text or something. There's a way that you can get the type of dialogue, I think you can get the message of the dialogue. I'd have to double check the docs on that. But there are certain things you can get from the dialogue. And then what you could do is you could basically do like a closure around it, where it's like you store that to a variable on the outside, and then you can reference it after.
Complicated. And then look, somebody had enough. Andy, they are on your butt. Somebody said, okay, what do I do in Playwright if I need to decide to accept or dismiss based on the content of the alert? So I need to get the message. I need to do that whole Lambda thing, get the message, and then make some sort of decision about what I'm going to do. It sounds pretty complicated.
Well, what I would say there is it's just a different way, a different place of specifying it. Just like in Selenium, where you would have like, the driver.switch to alert, and then if like get the thing from the alert, if do this, else do this, and then switch back to your other frame. Here in Playwright, that conditional logic would just be inside your Lambda. So essentially, you say page on dialog, and then you'd have that function in there, and then in there you would say if alert.something something this, then alert.accept, else alert.dismiss, right? So the logic is still there. And you could even, now I'm thinking about it, you could do assertions inside of that on dialog, I'm pretty sure, if you needed to check something. It's just, it's happening inside of that as like an event handler, basically. So it's just
and
a different...
you set it all up and then you click the button.
Yeah.
After. Okay. All right. All right, Patrice, let's put the poll up. I think it's pretty unintuitive, but
it's all the way you think about it.
it's all the way you think about it, right? So it's a different mindset. I can see people, if we don't have I'm not sure if we have a recipe for this on the cookbook yet, but if not, Andy, you got to make that one, because folks are going to get tripped up there.
That's actually not a bad idea. I'm going to take a note on that.
Yeah, take a note while we wait on the votes to come in here. Okay. Let me see if I have any other questions. All right, Selenium got another one with 63% of the vote.
All right.
Another question for you, Andy. I'm not sure if you know, but Eric asked what happens with Playwright when an unexpected alert occurs. So you didn't have any of the prep work to say what to do with this dialogue. What happens?
Yep. So like I was saying before, by default, Playwright just accepts alerts. So if an unexpected alert happens and you haven't specified how to handle it, Playwright will just be like, okay, accept, and then move on. So it doesn't get stuck there.
Okay. Cool. Okay, nice. All right. Let's go on to and we do have a recipe for this in the cookbook already, Andy. So you're off the hook there. All right.
Okay.
Yay. Selenium takes another one. Very nice. Okay. So moving on to our next round. I didn't even show y'all side by side. I'm sorry, but this was the side by side. All right. So next round was navigation. Okay. So this is also tricky, like dealing with multiple tabs and stuff, right? In the context of browser tools. So opening a new tab, let's see how that's done in Playwright.
Sure. So with Playwright, when you open a new tab, that is handled at the browser context level. So a little bit of foundation here. With Playwright, there's a browser context, and a page. The browser is the instance of the browser that's running. So that would be like Chromium or WebKit or Firefox. And ideally, you have one browser instance running straight through for all your tests. That might be weird because with Selenium, typically you have one browser instance per test. So it's like, wait, are you telling me, Andy, that all tests share one browser in Playwright? Yes, but with Playwright, what you do is you create separate browser contexts. And a browser context is like an incognito-like session within a browser instance. And they're quick and easy to spin up. One browser context has no access to what's going on in another context. And a browser context can have one-to-many pages. So the best practice is in Playwright, you have one browser instance, but each test has its own unique browser context. And so as part of your setup, instead of starting up a new browser for every test, you're actually starting up a new context within an existing browser for every test. And so with the browser context, like I said, a browser context can have multiple pages. Usually a test is only going to have one page, but in the case where you're opening up a new tab, what will happen is you're on a page and you click that button and it, like here, for example, page.click ID equals button, the kitchen table. That will open up, that target blank. It'll open up a new tab. Within Playwright, that's still within the same browser context. So what you want to do is you want to basically switch to that new page, or well, tab is like a new page. So your browser context just went from one page to 2 pages, and you're switching the focus to that new page. So what we're seeing here in Playwright, line 4, we navigate to the page. Now, line 5 is what we're doing is, it looks a little funny. Again, we have a lambda expression here. So we're saying page new tab, so the new tab that we're opening up is going to be what happens when we say browser context, wait for a page to open, and then the lambda is basically saying after I page click this particular link. So if I click this particular button on the one page, I'm expecting that to open up a new page. So we're telling Playwright, hey, wait for the page to open in our browser context and get the reference to that new tab. So that once we have that new page open, we now have the page object in Playwright pointing to that new tab. And I can make assertions on it just like I would the original page. So I can say assert that something on that new tab, this fruits and vegetables ID, is visible, just like we would with the other page. And if I wanted to, like now I actually have 2 page objects. I have the page and I have the new tab. So I could do assertions on either page at the same time, right? Or maybe not at the same time, but one after the other. So at line 8, if I wanted to assert something on the original page, I could say assert that page.locator something is visible. And now I have those 2 references I can work with.
Okay. Nice. All right. So let's see what Selenium's talking about for new tabs. Line 6 is the magic here. Again, good old switch to, right? So we're going to say, go ahead and give us all of the window handles. This will be a set array. And then we can just do some looping on this. So for each of these, we say, okay, let's switch to, and then we can switch to Windows. So that switch to has come in quite handy for us. It's familiar now. We've used it for frames. We've used it for alerts, and we can also use it for other tabs as well. Once we switch to that specific tab, we can go ahead and interact with anything we want to do on there. If we needed to go back to tab 1, for example, we would simply switch back to the first tab, okay? All right, so here is Selenium versus Playwright with handling different tabs. Okay, so it looks like you did get to change context, Andy, so if you needed to do more stuff in that new tab, that's fine, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. It's basically, okay. At this point, I'd have one browser context with 2 pages, and I'd be doing the interactions on the pages. And like I said, I have page and I have new tab, and so I could just choose to do whichever at whatever time I want. I don't need to switch back.
Someone is asking, how do you go back, Andy?
You would just say page, the original page dot whatever. There's no need to like switch back. The references are to each one.
I gotcha. All right, looks like Playwright has taken this one with almost 61% of the vote. All right, good job. Okay, so the next one is on API requests. All right. So this is the API we're dealing with here. This is what it looks like on the browser, but this is the responses and stuff like that. So these are recipes. So how does Selenium deal with API? This is a very common question if you look on Google, and the answer is it doesn't, right? It deals with browsers and that's it. But can Playwright handle them? Let's see, Andy.
Depends on which Playwright you're using, at least today. So the answer here is yes and no. So currently, Playwright provides API testing for their JavaScript and their Python bindings. They don't yet have it for Java or .NET, but I talked with the Playwright folks, and API testing is coming to Java in the next release, 1.18, and it's also going to come to .NET thereafter. So I can't show you Java code, sorry, but I can show you Python code to show kind of what it would look like in Playwright. So if we look at the Python code on the next slide, pardon me.
Sorry.
Well, you're good. Okay. It's going to look very similar to like any other kind of API testing that you've done. And specifically, if you're familiar with Python, this to me looks a lot like the requests library. So what you do is you would set up your test function. You would, instead of using the page, again, we use the browser context, because it's the context that's going to have the API request come from it. And so here, what we're saying is context.request, that's the thing that will build a request for you. And then we're going to call the type of HTTP method. So here I want to do a get type of request. You could do post, you could do put, you could do patch, all the delete, all the HTTP methods. And so here I'm saying, context request get with the endpoint that I'm trying to get. That will return a response object. From the response object, you can get things like the status code, the text of the message, whether true or false, whether it was okay or not, meaning like a 200. You can also parse it using JSON format, and in Python that will return a dictionary. And so what I just showed here is what that parsing looks like, and then just a few basic assertions on some things in the body. If you were doing thorough API testing, you'd probably want to do quite a bit more here, but I just wanted to show more over this is how you would go about it with Playwright. And so it's not here yet in Java. It's coming soon. Pretty cool stuff, though.
All right. Let's vote then. Fair is fair. Question overall, assuming that the API syntax is specific to Playwright, Andy?
The API syntax being specific to Playwright, I mean, it is a Playwright library, right? So you are making calls to Playwright classes. Okay. I wouldn't say it's like something super special. At least, like, I didn't look at the JavaScript one. I don't know what the Java one coming is, but I did go hands-on with the Python one. And like I said, I mean, it read to me like any other basic kind of request response API kind of library. Like nothing fancy, just the basics, but universal. Man, so 16 people voted for Selenium? Wow.
You know what? I'm fine with that, because maybe they think, well, look, it's not supposed to do everything. They do what they're supposed to do or whatever. So
true.
We'll see. So someone is asking, will the context set the user agent for the request, Andy? Do you know?
I believe that when you get the request from the browser context, it sucks in all of the stuff from the browser context. So I believe that includes user agent. I believe that includes like any cookies that you've got. One thing I want to look into is actually base URL. It might, this is something I want to double check. I think I read this in the docs. I could be wrong, but it might use the base URL so you can just use resource paths. Don't quote me on that one. I'd want to double check it. But I do know things like the cookies and authentication, that all gets sucked in directly. So, I mean, here's a cool thing you could do. If you wanted to do hybrid web UI REST API testing, like you could, log into to the website through the browser and navigate to a page. And let's say you want to preload data. Well, you can then get the the request from the context to preload data on the back end, just fill up your table, refresh the page, and boom, it's there. And that'll save you a lot of time instead of having to click and enter, stuff like that.
All right. Okay, so then let's go to round 9. Screenshots. So this is the page. We just basically have sorted this table. We want to take a screenshot of it, all right? So, Andy, how do we take screenshots in Playwright?
We take screenshots in Playwright like a boss. It's all good. So here we go. Oh my God, this is too much fun. I'm sorry. So let's say we navigate to a page and we do something on the page and we want to capture a screenshot of it. So line 7 is the call for capturing a full page screenshot in Playwright. So it's page.screenshot. That's the basic method here. What we need to do then is we need to provide some options, because there's a ton of different things we can do with screenshots. Things like, do you want JPEG or PNG? Do you want a full page or a part of a page? What is the output path to where you want to save this particular image file that you're creating? And so that's where this new page.screenshot options comes in. Again, it's a Fluent builder, just like the other options builders. And it's saying things like set the paths to be full page.png. By default, it will use PNG, so I don't need to specify that. Set full page true. I don't know if I absolutely need that or if that's something that's kind of automatic, but I just wanted to reinforce that it is a full page screenshot here. Notice here that with this call, you don't need to do any IO exception handling. It's just make the call. I didn't need to try catch. I didn't need to throw IO exception. Also, I didn't show it here, but in Playwright, you can do screenshots of individual elements. And to do that, it would be, instead of doing a page screenshot, you'd be doing page locator, find the element, dot screenshot, and then the rest of the call is the same.
Okay. All right. Very nice. Let's look at Selenium. So with Selenium, line 7 is where we say, okay, we need to cast the driver to this take screenshot class, right? So this gives us a whole new kind of object where we then can do some screenshot type of stuff. So I can say dot get screenshot as, and I can specify this output type. So in our case, we want like a PNG file. So we'll say output type is a file, but I can specify other types of output too. So it gives me some options here. I'm going to store all of that inside of this screenshot object, which I then do need to do some file manipulation in Java, right? So this is now basically an object. I need to turn it into something, like give it, the name I want it filed, stored as, and things like that. So the files part needs, like if I'm moving files on a file system in Java, that does require a try catch block, because it can throw an exception, if the file is not there and stuff like that. I wonder how Playwright got around that exception handling. But anyway, so I do files.move. I say, here's the screenshot, and this is what I want to save it as. And I can specify that path of how I want to save that. Okay. So that is the Selenium one. And if we look at these side by side, I think it looks about the same to me. I don't know.
Angie, I'm going to shout out something. I mean, I already picked on the whole exception handling thing. One thing I've always kind of scratched my head around was with
wait before they go, Andy, let me just say this too. In the Selenium 4, it does have the fancy where you don't have to do the full page. You can do no screenshots as well. So
true.
Let me just throw that out there. Selenium
true.
has up this a bit. All right, go ahead, Andy.
Yep. So one thing that I've always thought was kind of odd was that typecasting for the take screenshot for the driver.
Yeah.
Because you see that in Java. I know for a fact you have to do it in C# as well. I've always thought that's kind of like, I'm sure there's a story behind why they have that or some design principle. I've always just thought it was like, this looks and feels kind of weird, but maybe that's just me.
Okay, Eric is asking, I guess he likes having the screenshot in memory So he's asking, is that possible in the Playwright to have it in memory versus an actual file?
I believe it is, and I believe it's one of those options that you tack on.
Okay. William is asking, can we do comparisons on screenshots taken in Playwright? So neither Playwright nor Selenium will do the comparison of the images, but guess who does? Amplitude does, right? So thank you for the opportunity to plug our sponsor today. Amplitude does do image comparison. That's their whole business, as well as, cross-platform testing and stuff. So definitely check that out. Seth is getting really, really into the difficult question and saying, is Microsoft going to continue to support Playwright? I'm going to answer that one because they've been asked this question quite a bit. They've put out tools before and that have been sunset. So people are a bit worried, like, yeah, this looks like a really slick tool. I'll say that they have been building that team pretty extensively, the support behind it as far as all of the languages and stuff like that. They are definitely putting their money where their mouth is. So I do think that they will continue to support the project. Okay, let's go to the, William says that's the reason why I asked. Yes. Okay. Andy, one more question on screenshots. Just to be clear, for Playwright, is full page treating the screenshot as just the viewport, or does it actually do the entire web page? Do you know that?
I do not know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
Okay. We don't know, Russ. Sorry. But I hear someone from Playwright is in the crowd. So if you know the answer, go ahead and answer that for us, pretty please. All right. So it looks like Playwright ran with that one. Wow. So 91% there. 91% there. Okay. All right. Last round. Y'all ready? The last round is on videos. Okay. Very interesting. So let's say we wanted to take a recording of us filling in this login form and be able to save that. So in Selenium, unfortunately, it does not support video recording out of the box. Does Playwright support video recording, Andy?
Yes, it does. It's beautiful. Yikes. Yeah. So the way that video recording works is, again, it's handled at the browser context level, not at the page level. And what you do is when you set up that browser context, let's say in a before each, let's say in JUnit, your setup routine for your test. When you create the browser context, typically you just create it off the browser without any options. But if you want to record video, you add browser.newContext options. And then you set things like, hey, what's the directory where you want to send these videos? Playwright will record videos in the .webm video format. I believe it's like an open web kind of video format. Whenever I've had to open up the videos to watch them locally on my machine, I've had to open them up at a browser like Chrome. But it captures it basically from the time the context starts until the time that the context is closed. So here I've shown the code where what a typical setup routine in JUnit would look like, where you're creating a browser context with the video enabled. And then off of the context, you create a new page. Then in your teardown routine, that after each method is where you say context.close, and that's when the video will be saved to that directory for the session that you just did. It should capture all the pages, not just one page, which is pretty cool. And then basically, if you have it set up like that, then any of the tests that we would have run earlier, we can run again and capture video for. So I didn't want to repeat the same test code, but there's nothing different that needs to happen in the test code for the video. It's just how you handle the option at the context level.
Okay. All right. Very nice, Andy. Okay, let's get this final vote going. There's nothing really side by side here, but let's just go ahead and put in our votes. Right here. Let me see if there are any questions. What is the size of the videos roughly for one scenario video, Andy? Do you know?
So size in terms of like megabytes. I want to say that like I haven't done exhaustive testing on this. I was only doing like the little sessions that we had for the rounds, and those were, you know, a few megabytes max, because they were literally just a few seconds long each. Now, in terms of like the pixel size of the videos, that's going to be dependent upon what you set for your browser context and page options. Because with Playwright, you know, you can take the default screen size, you can explicitly set screen size, you can even emulate different devices. Let's say you want to do like an iPad or a Pixel phone. And so whatever viewport size you set in terms of pixel size, that's going to be what your video is.
Okay. Someone has asked, what will be the name of the video? Because you haven't specified it here. Is it just default, or can it be overwritten?
So if you just specify the directory, it puts in GUIDs and stuff. It's kind of icky. I believe when I was doing videos for my Python workshop a week ago, when I was running one test at a time, it would do GUIDs. When I was doing multiple tests, it was actually putting them in test case folder names to kind of make it a little easier to follow. I don't know if you can explicitly set video names. I'd have to check the docs on that.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be.
If Playwright, if y'all don't have that, y'all got to add that, because you need to be able to find the video after your test fails, right? Someone asked, can Playwright determine if music or sound is played in a video? They're not doing any verification, right? They're just basically capturing the video so that you have something when you're triaging your failures. They're not doing any comparisons or anything like that. Seth asked, so I guess Microsoft gave up on coded UI. The short answer is yes, they did. So that has been sunset, and it looks like they're putting their energy into Playwright, which I will argue is infinitely better than coded UI. So let's see. What about video recording of cloud execution? So what if it's not local? Does it still work? We don't know.
Do you mean to say if you are, well, if you're I don't know if you can have wow, what am I trying to say here? So like every time I've been running, it's been all on one machine, right? I have the Playwright process, you know, the Java or the Python or whatever, and then my browsers are running locally. I haven't done anything where I've run tests locally on my machine, but then had browsers running on some remote machine like a Selenium Grid or something. I don't even know if there's like an open source tool for that type of remote execution with Playwright yet. I've talked with some people. Some people have done some things privately that work, and I know different providers like you know, the different cross web browser platforms and all. They're all advertising Playwright support coming soon or is here, but there's no equivalent to like the Selenium Grid for Playwright that's publicly available.
Oh, good thing you said that. I want to highlight some of Selenium's places to shine, like the Grid. They do have a Grid available. You know, they are the W3C standard, you know, so they really have some really amazing pros going for them. So let's just highlight them and give them their shine there. Someone is asking which one is faster, Andy, and I know you did a little bit of benchmarking. Do you have some insight for Sanket about which one is faster?
Yes. Now, this comes with big ol' asterisks by it. This is based on, this is all based on just some little anecdotal stuff I've done on my own local machine. I've got one of the new M1 Macs. You know, it's really nice. It's really fast. What I did is I took the code from the 10 rounds we had today, all the ones where, you know, Playwright and Selenium both had something to show. In Java, same project, same JUnit thing, same machine. And so what I did is I ran all the Playwright tests and all the Selenium tests, trying to get as much of an apples-to-apples comparison for total execution time. I ran them serially, so nothing parallel or anything. And the results I got were pretty eye-opening. So first I tried Selenium WebDriver with headed Chrome, meaning you actually visibly see the browser, not headless. All the rounds, one after the other, took about 18 to 20 seconds on my machine. When I switched that to headless, with Selenium WebDriver, it took about 12 to 15 seconds. And I did these multiple times, so I was able to like, narrow down a range. So the ranges I'm telling you are not just like 1 or 2 runs. I'm talking like 10 to 20 runs of like repeatedly trying to see. So it's pretty consistent. When I did Playwright, and I did Playwright with headless Chromium, not Chrome, but Chromium, because that's what Playwright bundles with it and everything. All the tests, 6 to 7 seconds. Totally beat the pants off of Selenium WebDriver. I was shocked. I was like, whoa, that's a lot faster. But, like I said, that was with Chromium, not Chrome. By default, Playwright will use Chromium or WebKit or Firefox and kind of go, not the full-blown browsers, kind of, the little projects and all. You can test regular Chrome with Playwright. You can also test regular Microsoft Edge. It's called a browser channel. You have to set some additional settings, and what it will do is instead of using the bundled Chromium that comes with Playwright, it will reach out to your host machine's installed browser. So I did the browser channel with headless Chrome and Playwright, and I ran all the tests again, and it was 38 seconds consistently. Way, way slower. So something's going on with that browser channel with Playwright that makes it take even longer than Selenium. But if you just use the bundled thing like Chromium, it's way faster, at least in the little bit of testing I've done locally. This is an area that I hope I get some more time to explore with some more exhaustive testing and benchmarking, because even in the small scale, it was pretty eye-opening to me.
All right, cool. So let's go ahead and announce the winner, and then I'll take some more questions. Patrice, Playwright is the winner. Okay, so Playwright is the winner. That is very interesting. So when we did Selenium versus Cypress, it ended up in a tie. This time it looks like we do have a clear winner, and that is Playwright, the newcomer, which is really, really interesting considering, Selenium is the king of the hill, right? So interesting. All right, let's see what other questions we have. Does Playwright support Cucumber? I think the answer is yes there. You can integrate Cucumber, with any of these tools. One last question is in terms of architecture. We know that Selenium used browser drivers to communicate with the browsers. What does Playwright do there, Andy?
So Playwright does not need a WebDriver executable to install on your path, which is, in terms of the setup of Playwright, something really, really nice. What you do when you set up Playwright, first of all, you'll install the package for whatever language binding you have, Java, Python, Java, whatever, right? And then what you do is you run a Playwright install command depending upon your thing. Like in Python, you have to do this explicitly. I don't think you have to do it explicitly in Java. At least I didn't when I set mine up. But what you do with the Playwright install, that will grab those extra browser packages, the Chromium, the latest versions of Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit. And so you don't need to explicitly download something separate and install it on your machine. As long as you do the proper Playwright install, everything's set up for you.
Okay, very nice. Another question, maybe I missed this, but does Playwright support parallel execution of tests? That's an interesting question because Selenium is not a test runner, right? We use JUnit or something like that, and that's how we're able to do the parallel. But since Playwright bundles its own test runner, I have two questions. One, can I use TestNG or JUnit if I wanted to instead of Playwright's assertion? And then two, if I could, if I do use Playwrights, does it support the parallel execution of tests?
Yep. Wow. Loaded questions there. So right now, Playwright is primarily just like that browser automation tool in the same sense of Selenium WebDriver, in that it can be used or integrated with any kind of test framework. So in the examples that we did here in the versus battle today, on my own local machine, I actually have it set up in JUnit with Selenium as well as Playwright. So they're kind of really side by side just in JUnit. There is a Playwright test runner but I believe that is only for JavaScript. So the Playwright test runner has got a whole bunch of really, really cool features. But if you're doing Playwright Java, you don't get that. So like, today, like I pretty much had to use something like JUnit, or I could have used TestNG or Cucumber JVM, whatever, to be able to run the Playwright Java test today. Or I could have just written my own script and gone hog wild, Doesn't even have to be, doesn't need to be in a test framework, right? But we all know the advantages of test framework for test automation. Now, as far as some of the other bindings go, like in Python, again, there's no Playwright runner necessarily, but Playwright integrates very, very nicely with PyTest. And Playwright comes with, well, it doesn't come with, but Playwright provides a PyTest plugin that really makes the integration nice. Like it adds, for example, it adds command line options that you can toggle video on and off, or you can automatically capture screenshots after every test, or you can choose to parameterize against the multiple browsers. So that's not quite a runner per se. That's just kind of like a plugin on top of a runner that makes things nice. Now, Angie, you had asked specifically about the assertions, right?
Yeah.
If I wanted to in Java, could I use the regular JUnit assertions, or do I have to use Playwright's assertions? You can use the JUnit assertions if you want, right? If you feel very comfortable with saying like, okay, assert equals or assert this or assert that, the way JUnit handles it, there's nothing to stop you. You can do that. You would make the calls to Playwright to say, hey, give me the text or give me the count, and then I'm going to pop it in the JUnit assertion. But if you use the JUnit assertions instead of the Playwright assertions, you're not going to get the automatic weighting for the assertions.
Gotcha.
That's part of the magic that Playwright's assertions do. It's not just that they're doing the Boolean comparisons. It's that they're doing that automatic weighting and retrying for the timeout. So it's basically the assertion will continue happening. It'll loop and keep checking the assertion until it becomes true or the timeout hits. So that's
all right.
To me,
I got a lot
amazing.
more cat questions, Andy, so I'm going to cut you off, and then I'm going to do rapid fire. So I need you to give me your most concise answer. All right.
I'll do my best.
So someone, they're asking, does Playwright support C#? The answer to that is yes. It supports Java, JavaScript, Python, and TypeScript, and .NET. So lots of support there. Will Playwright keep up with browser and driver updates, you think, Andy?
Yes. Playwright's stance is to be evergreen. So every time there's new browser stuff, they will just put them out there.
Okay. So then Gerwin says, all right, well, what about if I don't want to handle the latest version? Can you run against like a previous version of a browser?
You could with browser channels. For Chrome and for Edge.
Nice. Can you run Playwright against can you execute it with the command line?
Depends on what you mean by that. Can you launch tests from the command line that happen to be using Playwright? Absolutely. Different language bindings will have different levels of command line-y stuff you can do. Like, I was playing around with the Python one, and there was a lot of cool command line options you could have with PyTest. However, while I was doing it in Java, I was doing things more through Maven, which is not necessarily command line.
All right. Dimitri asks, is it safe? Oh, this is a little saucy. Okay, it says, is it safe to say that Playwright is basically running all the tests in an environment that is far from reality because it's not using real browsers?
Ooh, how can I answer this concisely? It is correct to say that unless you're doing browser channels for the particular browsers I mentioned, Playwright is not going to be 100% match to what customers are going to be using in the real world, right? You're not running on IE 11 exactly. You're not running on, Safari or Firefox exactly. But what I would say is it's for most intents and purposes, it is probably good enough, right? You're asking, what is the chances that there's going to be a bug in Google Chrome that does not appear in Chromium as far as the rendering and the page goes? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the percentages on that. My gut, based on everything I've seen and done and worked in, is that chance is very, very, very minimal. I wouldn't say zero, but it's probably very, very small. And so when we approach that question from a testing strategy standpoint, it's a risk-based thing. Am I willing to gain potential benefits from Playwright with the possible risk that it's not one-to-one identical to what my user would be using? Now, sometimes for compliance, that may be dead on arrival, and I understand that. But my opinion, Andy Knight, Automation Panda opinion, is for most purposes, it's going to be inconsequential.
All right. I have two questions that I can answer with one answer. Is it possible in Playwright to use elements collections? Yes, you can do like get a list of elements in Playwright. And then two, can Playwright be used with amplitudes for visual testing? The answer is yes to that. On both of those, I have one blog post that shows how to do both of those things. Patrice is the same blog post from earlier that I've written. Would you mind pasting that in the chat again so that people can use that? Andy, I have a couple of questions about mobile. One, does it support mobile testing? Two, if we use Appium, can we migrate to Playwright for that?
Ooh, fantastic questions. So the way Playwright handles mobile is that it's mobile emulation. So it's not like you're running on a mobile device. What it does is it shrinks the screen size to emulate what that mobile device would be, so that it's what you're essentially testing is the responsiveness of your web app. Can you migrate Appium tests to Playwright? I don't want to answer that question. My gut is telling me no, because Appium is like pure mobile, like native mobile. I don't think Playwright supports that. I'm pretty sure Playwright is simply like browser based, but who knows? Okay. If there's somebody in the Playwright world out there who knows, no, you can do it for mobile, please jump in and say so. My gut is telling me no, but I'm not convinced.
But you don't know
for
answer. Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Last question is on reporting. Does Playwright have built-in support for this that produces beautiful reports?
I believe that the Playwright test runner has some reporting capabilities, but again, that is JavaScript. At least for like Java and Python, I did not see any sort of like specific Playwright reporting. However, Playwright does have a mechanism for capturing trace. So if you want to have trace messages go to someplace, that is in there. And even though that's not necessarily reporting, it is a type of testing artifact that can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So there you have it, folks. This was an amazing battle of the codes. You all have spoken loud and clear on your preference for this. It's interesting to see how Playwright evolves even further. Also, be sure to check out some of the newer features in Selenium 4. They have created like a lot of new amazing things that you'll be able to do. Let me ask you that, Andy, does Playwright support like the Chrome DevTools protocol and stuff like that as well?
I believe so. I'd have to look it up to know exactly how to do it, but I'm pretty sure. I think it actually, like, the whole mechanism of the interaction is through like the Chrome DevTools protocol. I'm pretty sure that's how it manipulates the elements.
Okay. So some interesting things. Hopefully this is giving you enough to begin to do your research, right? This is not a definitive answer where, Angie and Andy said we should be using Playwright. We did not say that. We were comparing two code bases for common tasks that we do every day, right? You try it for yourself, come to your own conclusions, see what works better for you. That's what tool evaluation is all about. So hopefully this is just giving you some food for thought and kind of introduced you to how these two tools handle browser automation. All right. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for tuning in. This was quite a lengthy battle, but it was a lot of fun, hopefully. So we will have the recording. This will be sent to all of you who have registered. So definitely share it with your team members and things like that so that they can be ready too. All right. Okay. So thank you so much, Andy. Thank you, Patrice. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.